How much do you want to know? I was sitting on my favorite bench looking across the road into the fields when an old guy sat down a couple of inches too close and gave me a toothy grin. His teeth were bad, yellowed, some were even black. He gave a long exhale. Whether weary or thrilled, I couldn't quite tell. I nodded, but he gave out no further clue. I raised my scope at a large black bird that was crossing our view. Most people are compelled to inquire at that, but not him. He just sat there. The explanation is that I am something of an expert observer of avian things, birds, and I raise my telescope to examine them closer than you can just see them with the naked eye. Not that I couldn't use the scope for butterflies or groundhogs or just about anything that might require a closer ID, but I like to keep an eye on the birds. Since the old guy didn't ask or comment in any way, I spared him my thoughts to myself on this particular bird currently in view. Those thoughts were, that's a black vulture, Caragips altratus, the genus name meaning a raven-like vulture, altratus, Latin for clothed in black. But actually, I was a little shy about even using the word vulture in front of the old guy anyway. He seemed pretty old, feeble even. How was I to know how much time he had left? The word vulture might push him over the edge. Worse, I actually knew something about this particular passing scavenger. That is, I knew he had just filled himself at a carcass beyond the trees in the field and was skating back to his nest in complete dripping satisfaction. Another reason not to mention this vulture to the old guy, who, the more I became aware of it, seemed to be emitting a rather putrid smell himself. The trouble is, I was only sitting on the bench as a sort of a way station to heading across into those fields myself. It was a way station of reluctance. As the sort of avian expert that I have already claimed to be, I have always felt, call it an obligation, to learn about the lives of my avian friends in toto. The good mixed with the bad, the beautiful and the ugly, the exuberant and the damned. I knew where that Caragips vulture had been before I had been there myself the day before, when things were just getting started, and I felt I should follow up to see how the presumably grisly scene was progressing. The truth will make you free, right? You should appreciate the universe in all its glory and in all its ugly, right? Vultures are light and graceful when soaring and have been discussed philosophically since ancient times as the ones who clean up when things get slimy and fouled. In the words of the poet Richard Wilbur, vultures keep nature new. I was both attracted and repelled by the whole idea of observing the vultures at work, which explains why I was still on the bench with the old guy rather than out there delimiting the gore with my observation and my wit. The previous day, I had been watching the sky from my walk in the fields, as I often did, when I saw several vultures. As stated, vultures are agile, graceful soarers, riding the air currents in intriguing, blithesome patterns. Of course, that is so they can effortlessly hover at the great heights required to spot dead animals from far, far distances before landing, gashing, and masticating them. But this time, many of the vultures were spiraling down, like newspaper ashes reversing the draft to a raging fire. I knew what it was. I quickly headed toward the descending black feathered column, which turned out to be further away than I thought, and I had to negotiate some ditches and barbed wire. By the time I got there, I was well off my usual track, but the scene was easy enough to understand. On its side lay a magnificent Palomino pony, which I had never seen before. And already, up on the mound of its rib cage, a number of the now squawking scavengers was already strutting and clashing with one another for beaking and tearing rights. I was glad I had hurried because I suddenly had a terrible fear that the birds themselves were early. That is, that the pony had not yet died, was merely weakened and down, and would feel the pecking and clawing and hear the crowing tumult of its laceration. But I saw flies on the pale creature's ears, which I knew would be flicked off if the horse were still sentient in any way. So the vultures had not begun yet to penetrate. Indeed, the outline of the body was of an awesome, muscled physique. Of course, one begins to wonder what the problem was. A virus, a fever, some kind of poisonous weed? I then came to understand that I did not want to know. In fact, I was not going to accept any of it. This beautiful animal, the vultures prancing and preening in their niche for cleaning up. I decided that what I saw before me was not a horse at all. It was a horse, but in the same sense that Pegasus was a horse. And what had happened here was that this heretofore unknown species of flying horse-like creatures was unusual in that, like some other types of living things, when they undergo changes in their life histories, they shed their outer selves, like discarding a skin, and go on to greater things, bigger and fresher and gladder than ever. And that this moon-colored creature had briefly touched down in this green field expressly for that purpose, had done it the previous night, and after drying out a bit in the starlit evening, had spread its new, even larger, more powerful wings and flown gracefully off toward the heavens. And those vultures were going to be very disappointed at the lack of sustenance in that hollow shell left behind. Not to mention that the wing covers trapped beneath the body were going to be particularly brittle and unsatisfying. The beautiful pony, body and soul, had gone. So you might be able to see why I was still on my bench, not yet heading on to my earthly pursuit of knowledge across the road and beyond the far, far trees. I was afraid of what I might find out there, that the myth that I had created would be contravened by putrid reality. Which is when I realized that the old guy really did have truly awful breath, indeed stank almost unbearably, so much that it was as if I were sitting beside an actual rotting carcass. I might become overwhelmed by a smell like that and simply fall onto the rotting pile, which is when I took a closer look and realized there was no yellow-toothed old man with bad breath. It was the flaky, gray trunk of a half-dead hackberry tree at the edge of the bench, and I had dozed off and felt the specter of death. And I was not going back to see the vultures at work. Those philosophers and poets were right. Let the birds have heart to make an end, keep nature new, in their own good place and time. I'll drop by later when the work is done.